So, Julia, good to see you. I remember your reporting back in oral arguments in December. You reported about how critical, what a critical impact this would have in future elections should the lower court's ruling be overturned. What is the high court saying in today's decision?
Thanks for remembering I was out here in December for those oral arguments, Lindsay. Yes, this is a case from my home state of North Carolina where the state legislature argued that they should have the power to draw the congressional districts in a way that was, frankly, gerrymandered, and their Supreme Court said so. They said that they should have power over their court under the independent state legislature theory. But what Justice Roberts is saying today in the majority opinion is that the way North Carolina interpreted the independent state legislature theory was way overbroad and that it could have incredibly large impacts on federal elections. Now, he's not saying that the court should never weigh in on this issue, but specifically in the way North Carolina interpreted this, it was too broad and they went beyond their authority. What really this case boils down to is what it could have been if the justices had decided that, yes, the North Carolina state legislature was within their power to make those gerrymandered congressional districts. They could also be within their power to manipulate a number of ways that we conduct federal elections from the state level. And then it could really just fall into each state's individual party to see how people are registering to vote, how those congressional districts are drawn, and a number of ways that they could start to cede power to the individual states based on the parties that are ruling them. But the justices instead, in a 6-3 opinion, said no, that's too far, and the state legislatures do not have that authority, and that they should be checked by their courts, by their state Supreme Courts, Lindsay.
So, Laura, essentially saying you can't remove this check. I mean, this is very significant for elections moving forward. Based on what you heard in oral arguments in December, does today's ruling surprise you? And what are some other takeaways that you have from reading through?
Does it surprise me? No. They had seemed very skeptical at the time of what they were being asked to do.
Okay.
The idea would be that state courts would literally have no role in evaluating whether the legislatures had followed the Constitution. That's extraordinary. That would be a breathtaking change of a law as we know it, and not to mention all of their precedents which say the opposite. And so it seemed that it was going to be at least the court was going to try to find some compromise position, but they didn't even do that. And it's interesting. You get the impression that they kind of see where this is going for 2024, and they want to at least establish some bare minimum rules of the road heading into that time, knowing that they're going to have a lot of election-related cases before them, just as they did last time around in 2020. You remember all of the cases that the former president filed trying to get the election overturned, trying to get the vote to flip in his favor. And all the time, the state court said no. If this decision had gone the other way, the state courts would have had no role to play in all of those decisions. So it would have been truly extraordinary if they had gone as far as they were being asked to.
So help me understand then, why did the Supreme Court decide to take this up? Why not just say, look, North Carolina Supreme Court got it right?
It's interesting. You could ask that about this one and the other voting rights case that they took having to do with how Alabama had allegedly gerrymandered its districts. And in that one, again, you would say, well, why even take the case? If the lower court got it right, which is what they're saying effectively here, why even do it? And it's a query, it's an open question to try to figure out what's going on in those negotiations. And, you only need 4 justices to decide to take up a case. It's interesting. We'll have to do some reporting to try to get to the bottom of it.
Julia, we know you.
Tuesday, 27 June, year of our Lord 2023. Mike Davis, Jeff Clark join us. This is kind of a blockbuster. Mike Davis, it was supposed to be 6-3 the other way. What happened, dude? This is a big one, a very big one. What happened?
Well, the Chief Justice who wrote this opinion had a completely different opinion in 2015 in an Arizona case. And the Chief Justice, like he did with immigration cases as it related to Trump versus Biden, he takes a very chiefy approach. And that chiefy approach is a political approach, where he adjusts his jurisprudence based upon the politics of the moment. And I think that these conservative justices cowed to the left. I think that they saw during the Roe versus Wade fight with the Dobbs decision that these leftists were threatening and intimidating them outside of their homes, illegally, obstruction of justice, threatening Justice Kavanaugh in his home in a 1 a.m. assassination attempt against Justice Kavanaugh, his wife Ashley, their 2 teenage daughters, Merrick Garland, and Joe Biden encouraged these, said that these were protected by the First Amendment, which they're absolutely not. And I think, frankly, the conservative justices absolutely wimped out here, because there's no question that the Elections Clause says that state legislatures shall decide the time, place, and manner of elections. And the Chief Justice's dissent in 2015 in the Arizona case said that, but somehow he's flipped his vote here and he's cowed to the left. And this means between these two redistricting cases, voting rights cases, this means that the Chief Justice and Brett Kavanaugh, his protege, and Amy Coney Barrett, who's scared of her shadow, are going to hand over the House of Representatives to Democrats in the next election.
So the left tactics work. The Alinsky tactics and the intimidation. You're saying the intimidation tactics work. We did all that work and put up people that are weak-willed and cowards, and they succumb to the pressure of the moment, because this is all going to climax in not just the House losing the House in 24, but it's going to. They've set it up that we're going to have the presidency stolen from us again.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to say now that Democrat politicians on state Supreme Courts and Democrat commissions get to override state legislatures when they redraw House district races. And Republicans are too weak and stupid to win this fight. This is going to be the Democrats winning this fight every time. Republicans piss away their money on TV ads so these Republican grifters in D.C. can line their pockets. They don't want to invest in real lawyers and the real ground game to win these fights. And then we have the Chevy Chase wing of the Supreme Court cowing to the left. And, you know, they play their little games. This case was moot. North Carolina Supreme Court mooted this case when it was a 4-3 decision by the North Carolina Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court took this case for review. The North Carolina Supreme Court switched control. It was a 5-2 decision overturning its prior decision. This case was moot. The U.S. Supreme Court did not even need to decide this case. They couldn't decide this case. There was not a live case or controversy. But the Chevy Chase wing of the Supreme Court went out of their way to find that this was a live case and hand a victory to the leftist. And you have to wonder, does the Chevy Chase wing of the Supreme Court, that, remember, there's a metro stop in Chevy Chase, so these left-wing lunatics are going to show up to their house all the time. Do they really think that these protesters outside of their house threatening and intimidating them are going to go away because of this? It only emboldens them to do this more often.
So what is your recommendation? Where do we go from here on this, particularly this issue of the constitutionality of the state legislatures actually deciding elections?
Well, maybe Republicans need to change the politics of this so the Chief Justice changes his mind, because he seems to follow the politics instead of the law, including his prior dissenting opinion in 2015. That's the problem. When you have a judicial philosophy that follows politics, you have no judicial philosophy. You're just a politician in a robe.
So what do you mean by that? I mean, how you try? Because this with the redistricting is. I mean, how do you hold the House?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Steve. I mean, that means that President Trump's going to have an overwhelming victory in 2024. Apparently these Republican-appointed Supreme Court justices want Democrats to control the House, so they do court packing and impeachment and term limits and cut off federal funding for the U.S. Marshals, protecting them from assassination attempts. That's the problem. The Chevy Chase wing of the Supreme Court didn't get it during COVID at all. They didn't get it during BLM and Antifa riots. They don't get it now. They don't get that we're dealing with a different Democrat Party. This is not our parents' or grandparents' Democrat Party. These are Marxist. They're trying to destroy us. They tried to kill Justice Kavanaugh. You would think that would be a wake-up call, but apparently not. Remember, in Chevy Chase, these goofballs are still wearing their COVID masks, and they still have their signs in their yard asking for immigrants to be flooded into our country. But not Chevy Chase, of course. Flooded into other neighborhoods. Don't send them to Chevy Chase.
Let's bring in Jeff Clark for a moment. Jeff, your assessment of what happened today, this ruling by the court.
Well, this is a very disappointing ruling, in particular after the North Carolina Supreme Court was reconstituted following elections, and it ruled in what we'll call Harper 2